Good evening, everyone. I'm Daniele. I'm the Chief Operation Officer of Codemotion, and today I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this Codemotion meetup. For those of you who don't know yet about Codemotion, just give me a few minutes to let you know about what are we doing. Codemotion is basically a platform for online and offline activity that support developer in their professional growth. We are aiming to create the largest community of developers in the world through our platform, where we can organize online and offline conferences, webinars, coding challenges, online, offline meetups, and as well online and offline hackathons. And we're gonna land into also learning path. In the platform, you will also find our magazine with technical articles, video, and everything that is really needed for developer for their professional growth. Basically, in the platform, there are also very important sections dedicated to the tech communities. Each community can have its own space to organize their own meetups, engage their members, and developer can check calendars and see what are the next meetup in Europe, both online and offline. We are also organizing 3 big online conferences for the next autumn, the next fall. The first one will be from 20 to 22nd of October, and it's focused on Northern Europe. The second one, early November, will be focused on Spain. And last one, end of November, with dates still to be defined, it will be focused on Italy. But now let's go to this meetup. This meetup is the second of a series of 5 appointments moving to our first online conference in fall 2020. But now, to better explain what it's all about and who are the awesome guests in this meetup, I'm gonna leave the stage to Pier Giorgio Niero, our master of ceremony, who's gonna introduce our panelists and the overall talk in this panel. So let me leave the stage to Pier Giorgio.
Hi, folks. Hi, everybody. And thanks, Daniele, for the intro. Now let me share my screen. I get, you see it because I see I'm sharing it. Good. So, all right. Hi, folks. Hi, everyone. I'm PG. Welcome to the second episode of Building Performing Teams. This is literally the online appointment for senior leaders in technology, brought to you by Codemotion. Engineering leadership is hard, and as leaders, we want always to drive the best performance for our products and organizations, and this comes with a variety of responsibilities, from organizing operations to shaping teams and roles and setting goals and setting technical directions. And of course, wait a second, because I got a message. All right. Well, sorry. And of course, measuring results. So this second stop, this is the second stop of our journey, a journey of 5 panels, as Daniele was saying, to unravel all these themes. And in this journey, will cover. Wait a second, I'm having a problem with my Zoom. I'm super sorry. Let me reshare my screen. Can you confirm, please, you see my screen?
Yes. Yes, we can see your screen.
All right. Sorry, I just received a message that somebody couldn't see my screen. What I was saying is, So this is the second stop of our journey, a journey that encompasses 5 online panels to unravel all these themes, a journey that will lead us to the online Codemotion conferences, as Daniele was saying, in October. At each panel, I will be your voice and discuss each topic with a pool of proven technology leaders from different sectors in the industry. So each panel will be roughly 1 hour long, and we will start with a 30 minutes discussion with the panelists on the selected theme, followed by a Q&A session of another roughly 30 minutes, where I will pick the most voted questions and I will ask to the panelists myself. You get to ask the questions via Mentimeter. And so let me explain what Mentimeter is. So this is an interactive panel. And by connecting at menti.com with the code 441994, you will get to participate to the live surveys that will inform the panel. And you will get to ask and vote the questions that will be addressed in the Q&A part of the session. So let's cut this short and let's enter in the topic of today's panel. So we are going to discuss the multiple phases of technical leadership. So I'm head of engineering, Anna is technical director, then other people are software architect, principal engineer, CTO, chief scientist. So different companies use a variety of titles to describe similar roles. Sometimes the same title can even define different jobs. And in this session, we will explore with our experienced panelists that you can see in the slide here, how they shape technical leadership roles in their organizations. And we will discuss how responsibilities are shaped and how they cascade within the organization, and when does a need for a role emerge. So without further wait, I'm pleased to introduce our fantastic panelists in rigorous infographic order. Anna Shipman, Patrick Kua, hi Anna. Hi Patrick, and Omoshola Odetunde. I'm super pleased to have you here, folks. And so let's start from a brief round of introduction. Who wants to start?
I can go from left to right. Hi, I'm Anna Shipman. I am the Technical Director for Customer Products at the Financial Times. So my group at the Financial Times is in charge of the fp.com website and the iOS and Android apps. I've got a team of about 50 engineers and I'm responsible for the overall architecture, security, operational reliability, and the development and culture of those engineers.
I guess I'm next then for going left to right. My name is Patrick Kua. I'm currently a coach and mentor for CTO's VP Engineering of scale-ups. Previously was a CTO of N26 Challenger Bank here in Berlin, growing the team from 50 to 350 people in just over 2 years. Been working in technology for about 20 years and author of 3 different books.
Great.
And I'll go. Hi, everybody. My name is Omoshola Odetunde, and I'm currently an advisor to early stage startups and CTOs. So I primarily work with teams anywhere from idea stage and pre-seed through Series A mostly. And I help CTOs make product, technical, and people decisions. I've been working as an engineer and an engineering leader for the past 10 years in a diverse set of roles that include front end, back end, user experience, and machine learning, all combined into kind of these hybrid product development roles in positions such as senior engineering and CTO. And currently I'm also working on my own product in my spare time, and I'll certainly be sharing more about that on my social channels, hopefully by the end of the year.
Great. Well, I figure out I haven't introduced myself yet. So hi, I'm Pier Giorgio Niero, PG in short. You can find me in London or on Twitter at PIGIUZ, Pidgets. I'm head of engineering at SuperAwesome, where I lead a team of 50 kid tech engineers building the internet and making the internet safer for kids. Now, let's dive into the core of this panel. And I want to start from asking a question to the audience. So again, this is an interactive panel. By connecting at benti.com and using that code, you can participate to the surveys and ask questions. So the question for the audience is, well, you already started answering to it. So how large is your technology organization? And the question for the panelists is, you folks have been around and been in senior leadership roles for several years in companies of different size. As a senior technology leader, what did you find the most challenging part of leadership at the different stage of growth, and how did you adapt to it? Anna, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think the challenge, the sort of biggest challenge as I became more senior was around how to say no and what to say no to. So initially, as an engineer and senior engineer, you progress by volunteering for things, and as you become more senior, there are more things that you can volunteer for and still do to a good level. When I became a technical architect, somebody said to me, you're going to have to start saying no to things that you really want to do, things that you would really enjoy, that you're really going to knock out of the park, but they just don't meet your goals. So I think that was the first inflection point, was saying no to things that I wanted to do. As I became more senior as a technical architect, I then had to start delegating things that I wanted to get done, but it wasn't going to be me who did them. And then I think the sort of the third stage of that, and where I'm at the moment, is where there are more things that need to be done than I can delegate as well. So it's about even saying no to things that seem absolutely crucial, because there are other things that are even more crucial. So those are the main inflection points I've noticed in my career so far.
I'll tag on top of that. I agree with everything that Anna said, and that's a lot of what she said is going to be part of what my answer is as well. I think for me, something that was quite challenging was that I get very excited about learning things and knowing things and doing things. And as I briefly described in my intro, I've worked in a lot of different areas, front end, back end, user experience, all of this. So I like to be involved in a lot of these things. And I think as I progressed and as people progress in technical leadership roles down the individual contributor track, you can still, for the most part, maintain your expertise in that area. You can still be the lead expert in whatever area you're focused on. But once I started moving into more higher level technical roles or a CTO role, that no longer became possible. It no longer became reasonable to expect that I would be able to answer everybody's technical questions that are working underneath me. And I think backing away from that was one of the very challenging things for me to do, and feeling comfortable in moments where people would look up to me for leadership or ask questions and I did not know the area that they were talking about, and feeling comfortable with that eventually. And I mostly worked with smaller companies, so I think realizing when that happens can be a little bit more challenging, because if you work with 500 engineers, it's pretty obvious to most people that you will not be an expert in everything that they work on. But if you started building a product from the beginning and you were an expert for a very long time, and then it expands beyond your scope of ability, I think it's kind of difficult to make that transition. So realizing when I needed to not try and dig into this, realizing when I didn't need to stop my time and really do deep dives into these different areas, like if all of a sudden somebody wanted to have a conversation about graph database, which is a very specific example that happened in my life, where they wanted to do this, and I was so focused on other stuff, and I kept doing all this research to eventually realize, actually, why am I doing this? I just need to make sure that I understand the business needs, that it is aligned with the business needs, and then they can make their decision about how they want to specifically implement it. But yeah, I think that was one of the hardest challenges for myself, just feeling comfortable with not knowing an area and just trusting the people to make the right decisions, and then me being my expert in my own way, because I'm the one who has all of this business knowledge and I can do the translation work between these groups.
I think they're really great answers, and I definitely agree with both Hannah and Omashola. I'm going to build on something that Omashola said, which is really about sort of knowing where your limits are. And there's a sort of saying, which is the whole "what got you here won't get you there." And I think this applies to many different transitions. So, when I was a developer, you're building your expertise around your technology, your whatever technology stack, your tooling. But when you get into a tech lead or a leadership role, you start to realize actually that sort of skill set won't help you with working with people, and you have to rebuild skills again. And you have to then start to understand how to resolve conflicts, and particularly start to get buy-in from many other people and work alongside other sort of leadership roles like a product owner or a product manager, and maybe an engineering manager if you have one. And then as you sort of increase your scope again, one of the things that I learned, what got you there as a tech lead or an effective team lead won't get you there as your sort of organization grows. And this is really, instead of working with people and leading people, you're really trying to work on the structure and the way that teams and organizations work effectively, because it's often the sort of structures and processes that are really blocking people from getting work done. And, a lot of people who are good leaders will often know how to say no, but if the organization is constantly pushing things onto teams, they're not really set up for success. And I think this is something that you start to work out, the changes from being an IC to a team lead or a tech lead to a role with even greater scope. What got you there won't get you to the next step.
All great answers. Really cool. On my side, one of the things that I found difficult growing and in a leadership position was to step back from technology, as Omashola said, and focusing more on preparing the groundwork, right? So laying the groundwork for them to arrive and build something bigger. And sometimes that encompasses learning things that you really didn't see yourself learning, right? So, or wanting to learn. So things about budgeting, things like, security certifications, that type of stuff. I mean, people can be passionate about those things, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I didn't see myself doing these things years ago, and here I am now. I see we have a varied distribution of sizes in the audience. Is there any inflection points that you found appearing over and over at specific sizes? So when did you start saying no? When did you start stepping back from technology? When does these things happen? Is there a pattern that we can share with the audience?
This doesn't directly answer your question, but it's sort of adjacent to your question. Something I was thinking about when Omashola was speaking was that. Excuse me, I've got an alarm going off. Talk amongst yourselves.
Maybe jumping in then about inflection points. I think one big thing that sort of constrains that is communication size, and that really comes down to organization team structure. So, a organization that is well organized and thinks explicitly about sort of minimizing the amount of coordination between people and teams, sort of good architecture concepts, high cohesion and low coupling, will be able to scale a lot more effectively than a same sort of or similarly sized organization that is poorly organized. So I think if anything, applying good architecture design principles to organizations is also a key to sort of knowing when to break things down. And you get the same sort of symptoms of, listening for what I call sort of pain-driven development, right? If you hear the same sort of problems coming up a couple of times, you might want to dig a little bit deeper to understand where it's coming from. And if it's actually something that is originating in several different team members, then that's definitely a topic to address at a team level. Or if it's across a couple of different teams, really, then you need to take care of it at a sort of department or a sort of group level, or an organization-wide level as well, right? So it's kind of the noise or the common noise factor pain that people are feeling as a way of trying to understand what to drive change, because I don't believe in sort of change for the sake of change's sake. Really has to be there for a benefit.
Yeah.
I'm managed to locate the alarm and switch it off. So one of the difficult things as well is when you're no longer writing code, when you're more senior, the feedback loops are much slower. So when you're writing code, you know, your tests pass and you get that kind of gratification quite quickly. And the more senior you get and the larger the organization you're working in, the longer those things take. So it might be that you find a pain point, you address the pain point. The work to address it is a huge piece of work that takes a long time. And then you don't actually get the feedback for maybe 6 months, maybe a year. And that's a real challenge, I find, dealing with that slower feedback loop.
Yeah, very true, very true. All right, anything else to add on this? Should we move on?
There are a couple patterns I see, but just one that's always really interesting to me, especially since I work with such early stage companies, is the transition from the technical co-founder to CTO or leadership position. And I see this to be a consistent struggle. And it's the same thing that happens in larger organizations too, going from individual contributor into more managerial positions or more tech leadership positions. But it's something that is required to happen at a very early company. And so I see a lot of people who come in and they have the technical expertise to at least some degree to get the product off the ground. And similar to what Patrick was saying, which is what gets you here isn't what's going to get you further. But it's a completely different set of skills, and many of them have never had to use these skills before. So there's a lot of interesting work that I'll try and do with these early entrepreneurs to help them figure out, okay, do they even want to take on the role of a CTO? That's the first question. Is that something that's interesting to them? Is that where they want to see the biggest challenge? This might address a further question. I hope I'm not doubling up. But yeah, basically just as a quick answer to that, that's one of the incredibly common and very interesting points that come up, trying to help people transition into leadership roles and build leadership skills when they haven't necessarily had to have it before. And also figure out how to work with other people in larger teams and how to make technical decisions, feel comfortable with it, how to deal with people dynamics when they haven't had to deal with it before, and representing the organization as a technical leader. So a lot of these things happen very quickly, even after hiring on one additional engineer. But at least usually by the time they've hired on three or four engineers, it comes up.
I think that's a really fascinating pattern that you call out, Mashallah, as well. Totally agree. And I think the other thing that makes it difficult is the founder sort of title, and they have this other special weight in the organization as one of the original starters of the company. And I think founders are very special creatures, each very different.
Yeah, I can't but agree with that. Mashallah kind of sneak peeked the next question. So let's dive into that. So the question for you at home, for the audience, is what are the main responsibilities of a senior technology leader? And the question for you panelists is, well, what are the key responsibilities that you decided to keep on you as you grew in your leadership roles? And what responsibilities did you decide specifically and deliberately to delegate to somebody else? Mashallah, do you want to start on this?
Sure. So calling back to some other things we talked about before, I think finding the best way to use your time is very important, especially at early stage when you have very limited time to dedicate to a lot of things and you have limited resources. You really have to figure out where can you have the biggest impact. And so I think this is in part why I said it's important to ask these early founders if they really do want to take the CTO role on, because they don't have to. And I think that's an important question. But figuring out where do you see your role evolving? And for me, in these early leadership positions, I had to figure out pretty early, do I want to take on more of a people management role, or do I want to take on more of a technology-focused CTO role? And for myself in particular, I think I do quite well with people management. I really enjoy working with people. I think people enjoy working with me so far. But I find that doesn't feel like the most enjoyable, most energizing part of the job for me. So I can definitely do it, and I enjoy training other people to do it. But over time, I found that wasn't the most energizing for me. And since these are kind of two pretty distinct branches at times, it was important for me to figure out which one I want to be on. So what I ended up doing is focusing more on you serving as a translator between business and technology, and then focusing my technical work on experimentation so I could make technical decisions. So that allowed me to stay in touch with tech while not blocking people, because that's also a big issue that comes up if you try and stay involved in tech as you move up into leadership roles. So I tried to figure out, okay, where can my technical expertise still be used and build things so I can make decisions while not limiting the technical work done. So like for concrete examples, what that looked like, one time I worked on figuring out an AI product strategy for the company to figure out, okay, how can we use machine learning on the data sets that we have here to come up with interesting additional product features that we can offer. So that's something where the rest of the team isn't blocked, as long as it takes me in the free time that I have to come up with this, to finish up this strategy while I'm also working on like IT strategy and GDPR and all of this other stuff. As long as it takes me to finish that, they can still finish the core product development work. And I use this knowledge and expertise I have to keep myself excited and energized. And then when I come up with a strategy, I share it with the team and then assist people to actually implement it. So for me, that was a way to still keep my technical bent and energy, because I never really want to get too far away from that while staying in a leadership role. And then transitioning a lot of the process and people management into a separate person who ended up becoming a VP of engineering. So that was kind of the split that we ended up doing.
All right. Who wants to follow up to this?
Maybe I'll jump in here, because I think we ended up with a similar sort of split in 26 as I was sort of growing the team. To answer the key question about how to delegate or which things to delegate, I think part of it is depending on how you see teams. And for me, teams are really about this diverse set of skills and experiences. And so what you can delegate is a sort of function of also who you have around you, that you're confident these responsibilities can be taken care of effectively as well. And so as I was growing the leadership team at N26, one of the things that I knew that we didn't have in the team that I couldn't yet delegate was really the ability to sort of separate engineering management and the sort of people and delivery side of sort of development. So I'm aware of what my strengths and what my weaknesses are. And, I would try to make sure I play to my strengths, play to the tasks that I think I will enjoy and energize me, as Marshall said. But also in a lot of startups or a lot of organizations, you have the team that you have right now, and that's not going to change in the next, say, 2 weeks, right? You can't simply just magic people up. And so you also have to understand what's your sort of short-term set of things that you have to take care of, even if you don't want to do it. But also the long-term game of really thinking about, okay, these are things that need to be done. What's the right way of dealing with these sustainably, right? And sometimes that might be about you learning and growing these skills, like PJ, you said about budgeting and learning about security compliance topics. These are things that do need to be done. The question is, okay, how do we deal with this sustainably long term? And then finding a way of doing that. And I think that's a lot of the key driver for me is either you have to grow people into be able to cope with that, which is a win-win because people get to learn something new, they get to grow into a new experience, and you get to have more time back. Or you need to perhaps find people with the right skill set. One of the interesting things about a really rapidly growing organization is people don't have that much time to learn or to gain lots of experience. And so often it's very helpful to bring in people with experience from different environments because they'll have different toolkits and different approaches to dealing with it that your organization can actually benefit from. So that would be my approach. Great.
So I think I completely agree with all what you've said, what both of you have said. I think Amashala hit the nail on the head with the sort of focus has to be on where you can make the highest impact, like what the activity as a leader, what's the highest leverage activity that you as a leader can do. In terms of delegation, my approach to any role I ever have is ultimately to make myself redundant. Ideally, replace myself with a small shell script or somebody who's grown into the role. So I want all of my reports to be an ideal candidate to take my job when I move on. So that's partly about growing people. That's partly about, as Patrick said, hiring people and building the team. And so my approach to delegation is to delegate as much as I possibly can, more than I feel comfortable with most of the time, because it's always going to be a growth experience for people working for me. And also to share a lot of context. So initially, when I first started this role, I found that there was so much work that I just didn't pass on everything that came to me, because it was just completely overwhelming, and I didn't want to drown the people, my direct reports, with all this information. But what actually ended up happening was, if I didn't pass something on, somebody might go round me or might go to talk to them. It might come in from another angle, and they would have no idea that this conversation had taken place. So now I share like as much context as possible. So that's, you know, sending on emails, that's inviting people to come to meetings with me or stand in for me at meetings. And the idea there is, if they have all the context that I have, then ideally they will start to be in a position where they can make the same kind of decision that I would make in that position, and then I can step even further back and concentrate on even more higher leverage activities.
Those are, I'm grateful of having you here today. Those are very insightful answers. I would add to this that the point that you made about making yourself redundant, and the point that you made about focusing on the highest impact, were fantastic. I'm totally aligned with that. One of the key differences that I would say that I would add to this is I would rather focus on what would be the most impactful thing that I can do in 6 months from now, so that the thing that is the most impactful thing that I can do today, I can delegate it to my best person or my best team and support them. So this would be my only penny on top of what you just said.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's a really good point. You want to be thinking about not today's problems, but the problems that are things that are going to be a problem in 6 months, and getting ahead of that. Yeah,
that's literally the only little thing. I see we have plenty of answers from the audience. So first in the ranking, they said set technical vision and strategy, then lead, inspire, manage people, hire the right people. Do you think, how do you feel with about these answers from the audience? Do you feel there is anything to add or to be discussed?
I would probably put 2 and 3 higher than the one that's currently first, setting technical vision and strategy, because I see sort of technical strategy and technical vision as ideally like a group effort. If you hire the right people and you lead and inspire those people, then the setting technical strategy is something that we can do as a team.
I would also put the own IT and security strategy above structure of the org team. It's one of those things where security strategy gets forgotten about, and that's a big dire consequence in today's world.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of those. So I wish there was something I wanted to add there right now, but there isn't.
That's good. That's good. All right, so let's move to another question. So we just talked about the responsibilities that you decided to delegate, and how you, the question here is, how would you go about shaping the roles on the receiving end of those responsibilities? So do you have a clear split in mind between, I don't know, process management, people management, and technology direction, something like that, or some sort of aggregation of these responsibilities? And on top of that, what is the criteria that you would use to make such choice? Making yourself redundant, basically. What criteria would you pass on? And for the audience, well, what is the shape of the roles and responsibilities in your tech teams that you went for? The split between tech, people, and process, basically. Patrick, do you want to start on this?
Yeah, I might want to start off by talking about it depends on your company culture. And the reason I talk about this is because you need to think about how not just your engineering teams, but also how that reflects in the broader company. So it's sort of in sync. In an ideal world, if I was working in an organization that was really sort of open and didn't really want to have too many ideas of hierarchy, even though there is always hierarchy if people say there is no hierarchy, I'd be opting for more teams focused with roles, but it doesn't really matter about who plays those roles as long as the roles are fulfilled. And so this is a little bit more on the kind of, I forget the name of the holacratic approach to team sort of management, where you're trying to identify what things need doing, and you're trying to push as much of that responsibility into the teams, empower them as much as possible, and make sure that teams can take care of everything. Now, in the real world, that's not always possible. You can do this with very long-lived, stable teams where people get to know each other quite well in a really rapidly changing organization, such as what we went through with hypergrowth. Here you're kind of playing with timing, which is how quickly maybe you can hire people with the right sort of skill sets and how quickly people can grow, as well as how many more things need doing. And in a very chaotic changing environment, this is where actually I believe that having a little bit more focus and clearer role definition around a certain area made sense. And this actually led to a blog post that I wrote called The Trident Model of Career Development, which sort of not just outlines 2 tracks, which is often talked about in the US, like an individual contributor track and a management track, but actually 3 tracks of sort of technical leadership. So we talk about technical leadership, which is where you would have your tech leads, your architects, your principal engineers. You have what I would consider a real true individual contributor, which would typically be a sort of staff engineer or a specialist type role. And then you have management, which is engineering management in particular. And for me, the idea here is really about expectations and clarity and focus. And it still depends on the situation. So for example, a team of 3 or 4 people, you don't need both an engineering manager and a tech lead, because there's going to be then extra sort of overhead and people step on each other's boundaries. But as the team gets larger, what I found is you either need a very experienced tech lead who is very good team lead and delivery management skills. But often as the team gets larger, they kind of trade one off the other, and they end up sort of defaulting back to maybe focusing on technical decisions and architecture, particularly if you're dealing with a very complex solution. And so as we grew at N26, we actually split out the engineering management role from tech leaders, where the idea is they should still work well together. So they're a co-joint leadership sort of group, where one sort of area, the tech lead could focus on technical decision making, making sure that we've got the right quality, that we're improving our sort of ability to deliver continuously and improve our sort of reliability of our services. And then the other sort of focus was really about particularly as the organization changes, communication and sort of chasing dependencies and making sure that plans were in alignment. So what I would maybe classify as delivery management, but also team management and communication, right? So as an organization is changing its priorities, engineering managers should already be plugged into understanding where things may be going, not trying to give too much information to the team because it may change again the next day. But when it becomes very, very clear that it's definitely the right direction, then the team has the right context as well. So that balance of sort of shielding the team from constant noise of change, but also enough context so they can do their job effectively. And then they worked effectively with product owners. I didn't really talk about the IC so much, but in a large organization, I don't think you really need too many specialists or IC roles. If you're a Google or a Facebook, you need the people that invented PHP or know how to write a database driver from scratch. Most organizations don't need that, but you do have people that just love being hands-on, and they still need to be able to work well with team members, so collaboration skills up there, but they don't probably want to be leading a team or a technical topic across multiple teams, and maybe their management skills aren't so good, and so that's another sort of growth path of how I think about it.
All right, thank you. Who wants to follow up to this?
So I'll jump in because this is something we extremely briefed before we started, which is in general, I don't like to split the IC and manager path as, the individual contributor and manager path as a kind of career trajectory. And I think you've touched on some of the points that I would have made, Patrick, which are, I think that there are very few of our organizations that are actually so complex that we need like very, very senior individual contributors. And I think as you become more senior in technology, the way that you have a bigger impact and make more is around things like growing people, mentoring people. And so splitting off a kind of manager track from individual contributor track where both can progress equally, it seems there are very few organizations where the individual contributor track is actually as impactful as the sort of tech leading track. What is interesting though is, because I completely agree with you on delivery management, and in my when I'm thinking about it, the delivery management is a separate discipline. And I think sometimes when we talk about the individual contributor versus the engineering manager track, then the engineering manager is actually more doing delivery management. So I'm not suggesting that every senior engineer should be doing delivery management. So that's kind of that was one of the things that I thought we might have a disagreement about. It doesn't sound like there's too much disagreement, but Mashallah, perhaps you can step in and we can argue.
Yeah, I think that Anna's point about it not necessarily being needed in all organizations, I can agree with that part. I do think that many organizations outside of, like Patrick said, a Google, don't necessarily have a need or a path for somebody incredibly specialized as an IC. I do hesitate to say that those two roles should not be separated from each other, however, because I think oftentimes the skill set that's required in one is quite different from the other. And what I've often seen in organizations that don't do a good job of splitting them at some point is that the only path of progression for an engineer or an IC is to move into management. And that can be for somebody who has no desire or interest in management, or someone with no skill set in management. And then you have people who are really great engineers, but not great people managers, who are now managing people, hardly doing engineering. They're not very happy with the job. The people they're managing are definitely not happy with the job. So that's why I'm hesitant to say that there isn't a requirement to separate them, because most people who want to progress in their field want to keep going further up the ladder. So if the only way to go further up the ladder is to force or to do that kind of bridge the huge chasm between being a really great engineer and then being a people manager, and they're not supported in that process, it can lead to a lot of really damaging results that I've seen in different organizations. But I do agree that often there is kind of this limit on the IC path, because unless you work for some place where you're doing some very intense low-level machine learning algorithm, something or other, it could be difficult for you to really continue to be that specialized and have a role that's high impact within your organization. So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's the key for me, is like from the business perspective, I mean, I completely understand that as an individual contributor, like, you know, lots of people do not like people management or aren't particularly good at it and don't want to gain those skills. But from the business perspective, there is only so much impact you can have as an individual contributor if it's not a very, very complex environment. So then from the business angle, you know, I can understand the individual contributor wishes to progress on their career, but what extra benefit are they adding to the business? I think so. That's kind of, and I think that's the case for a lot of, I mean, there certainly are organizations where the extra benefit is huge, and it's definitely worth, you know, worth continuing that career path. But as in many of our organizations, where you start to add the more impact is where you expand your influence through mentoring and growing other engineers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the impact is a big indicator of higher sort of levels in a sort of career ladder. And particularly when you think about like difficult technical topics that cut across an organization, they're really hard, because typically you don't have one manager that has the authority in their sort of team. They have only a part of the piece, and maybe driving agreement about maybe a API that all teams will adopt. That requires a lot of influencing skills, and somebody needs to be really quite technical to both listen to teams and gain that trust. And that's a really hard, difficult skill to have, and has a lot of impact. And I think that's where I like to focus, particularly the technical leaders, is that, you know, they're not managing people, but they're leading these technical topics that are hugely impactful, and getting some alignment across the organization that isn't mandated from above has huge value to a lot of organizations.
Yeah, I agree. If you're able to make the distinction in leadership between technical engineering contribution leadership versus product or not product management, engineering management, people management leadership, then I think that's really great and an organization that can continue. And I've worked with one or two before where we tried to make that distinction to make it possible for them to then, you know, progress in kind of two categories, one being more towards a VP engineering trajectory that's more about people and process, and then one's further towards a CTO trajectory that's more about being the technical expert. So organizations, I think they're able to do that, are quite good. I think it is particularly challenging, especially for smaller organizations to have the ability to do that, because when you only have 20 people on your team, it's a little bit hard to let one person go down this in this technical expert versus an engineering person. You kind of just have to do what you have available for you. But in general, I like to feel like that's quite a nice ideal trajectory. Oh, but one thing I wanted to add, in addition to everything that was already said about shaping roles, was just, and then there's a lot of bright light coming in from this side on my face right now. Yeah, one thing I wanted to add is this idea that I had read about previously with role inertia in this like business course. And I think that this is something particularly relevant for small companies and quite challenging too, because you have so much time pressure to make decisions and you have so many requirements that are immediate. But that's one of the biggest things is being able to look past the immediate at the long-term effects of the decisions you're making, because they often become very concrete. The decisions that you make within the first year or two of your organization, even if you try and change it later, becomes significantly harder. And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges for engineering teams and small organizations. You're like, okay, we need more developers, we need more people to lead this, we just need to get things done. And then you make these decisions that make life harder for you in the future. So I bring up role inertia because this is a really interesting concept that I learned about, where essentially the roles that you assign at the beginning later define, like essentially when those people leave, you now have a them-sized gap inside your company. And so the people that you next need to hire have to have the specific skill set to replace that group or that set of skills. And that may not be the set of skills that you need or want in the future. So if you start off with somebody who's very highly skilled, for example, in mobile development, and they move into a leadership position and then they leave, most likely you have already hired on somebody else that's going to be skilled in the things that they're not particularly skilled at. So you have people who are front-end leads or full stack or whatever the case is. And so now that you leave, you need somebody to replace that skill, but you also have these people you've moved up that have front-end, back-end, all of these other skills. So if you bring in another person who now has front-end, back-end, all of these skills as a tech lead, you might have challenges there or conflict that you wouldn't realize and like you're not aware of in the future. So I think it's very important to, while you're making, like, it's very difficult, I understand, because there's a lot of time pressure. So you want to decide now, but you really do have to take a breath in and realize that the first few hires are going to indicate your team culture, your team organizational structure, your impact, your delivery flows, and all of these things for several years afterwards. So really taking significant time with the core team, besides just engineering, but with the team to sit down and figure out who do we think we will, like what kind of roles do we think we'll need in the next 6 months? What kind of people will we need? What kind of team do we want to develop beyond the immediate? Because the decisions that you make now are going to be solidified even after those people leave, even after the organization changes quite a bit. And it's much harder in the future to change them. So something important to think about.
I think it's such a great term, role inertia. And I think if we go back to the beginning with the sort of organizations, actually a lot of people at the sort of higher organizations probably know this. If you've gone the digital transformation, the agile transformation, the migration to the cloud, or your continuous delivery, you've gone through all of this stuff before, right? So testers moving into quality assurance, moving into quality engineers. If people start to associate, and this is where I think the role inertia becomes the issue, their identity with a role, then change becomes very difficult, right? So people, when they see change in an organization, they sort of feel threatened about what their job means, what their role means, and also what they've sort of added value to the organization. And as Marshall said, that the organization is going to need different skills, different roles and focuses in the future. And you have to be careful about when people get trapped in a role and that role becomes their identity, because then you have to understand how you support them in sort of making that shift. See this in the sort of SRE ops space, right? People who used to manage servers, physical hardware, some of them getting labeled as DevOps or SRE people, but they don't really have the skills. And this is one of the challenges, right? So it's a different role, different skill set of dealing with cloud infrastructure, a different mentality of automating these things. And a lot of organizations who've been around for a long time will know this role inertia. So great term.
Yep. I already see we have 3 questions while people still vote. And they mostly agree with one of you, given that you have roughly, well, similar yet different answers to the same question. So I would jump to Q&A. Ready for it? So we currently have 3 questions, and as a reminder to everybody who is at home following us in the audience, this is an interactive panel, so please connect to menti.com and use that code up there, 441994, to submit your questions or ask, or vote for a question that is already being asked. So let's start from, this one that is the most voted for the Trident model that may work at the team level. Yeah, that may work at the team level, but does it support career development for leadership? Well, I guess that this is probably for you, Patrick, given that you created that model.
I think it depends on what you mean by leadership. So for me, leadership is not about formal authority, and managers who have formal authority, I would expect them to also have leadership skills. But the Trident model does apply at lots of different levels. So we went all the way up to director level, which was just under the CTO, which was me at the time. And we had equivalents for all of these different areas. We had them in different proportions. So for instance, I think we had, out of an organization of about 320 people, we only had 2 staff engineers, because that's all the level of specialty that we really needed. Whereas we had significant numbers of sort of senior engineering managers or heads of engineering. And then we also sort of had principal engineers that would focus on architecture topics across the organization in different sort of areas. I think it is a very good point at the end, which is really, you end up with a single person responsible for both tech and people. And ultimately, that's kind of a CEO. Like if you look at a CEO, right, that's the person that's accountable for an entire organization where you have marketing, you have HR or people, you have technology, you have product. That's the same sort of principle, just applied in a smaller remit.
Yeah. Anything else to add to this, or should I mark it as answered?
I think I agree with the point about the kind of, that's eventually being the CEO, and that's kind of one of the things I think about not separating the tracks is it gives you the opportunity at any track to reach the top if that's where you want to go.
All right, I will mark it as read and answered.
Maybe I would add one more thing, which was, I think when you are playing that role, you won't be an expert at everything underneath you, right? And I think that's the art of being able to lead effectively. It's kind of actually what Michelle mentioned earlier, I think asking, where to ask questions and where to focus in on the things that aren't your background or aren't your sort of specialty. And that's the sign of a good leader, of being sort of able to be adaptive. But ultimately, you have to be able to be sort of responsible for a broader remit than what you were used to.
Yeah, I thought Mama Charlotte's example at the beginning was really insightful there about when you have to step back from the technical questions, and then as the more senior you get, the bigger your organization, it's not even questions that you could theoretically dive into, it's just completely outside your domain.
All right.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. One thing that I wanted to add to that, what both of you said, but especially Patrick, is the ability to make sure that you're getting quality information from people who are working underneath you, and making sure that they feel very safe and very comfortable communicating with you. Because once you reach a certain level, which happens very quickly, even after 3, 4, 5 people in your organization, you are often not able to make every single decision for yourself. And especially if you start working with people in other technical competencies than yourself, you have to be able to trust them to provide the insights, and you have to trust that they know what it is that they're talking about. But they also have to trust you that you're not going to fault them if they don't have all of the answers. Otherwise, they'll be holding back information, or you won't get a broad perspective of what's happening in the organization. So honestly, I think one of the best things that we as leaders can do is to provide a really safe space of communication between ourselves and the people who work with us, because that makes our job easier. Because ultimately, I don't want to have to not be certain if I have all the facts and the details so I can actually work with them. So yeah, this is just something I want to add, the importance of that, which is a bit of the quote unquote softer skills that exist, but it's one that's really important. And that is involved in the way that you give feedback to the people who work with you, the way that you validate the ideas that are being suggested by them, the way that you give space to exploring ideas that come up from them, like a variety of things that are related to having healthy leadership between you and the people who work underneath you. But crafting those skills are incredibly important, because otherwise you end up wasting a significant amount of your time having to go individually to people and seek out information. Whereas if they have a really comfortable, open relationship with you, they'll openly give information to you, and then you can use that to make the best decisions.
Yeah.
300%. 400, I would say, even. Yeah. And honestly, I think this also partly answers this other question. That is how to grow a team from 50 to 300 people and maintain a great engineering culture. I would, again, start by seconding what Mashallah just said. So create a culture for feedback. And I pass the ball to you folks so you can pour your insights on it.
Maybe I can start. I've got a talk actually, so I'm not going to give this because it's like an hour long and you could watch it online. It's called Secrets of a Strong Engineering Culture. And, I think when a lot of people talk about management, they often say, oh, management's not good because they don't really understand technical people, particularly if they're not sort of as technical as they see themselves as. But I don't think you need to be. One of the interesting things about good management is that they're really unblocking things in the organization. And I think understanding what motivates engineers is a key to really building a good engineering culture. So managers who really understand what is a motivator and what engineers need, right? And you can go back to Dan Pink's autonomy, mastery, purpose, right? So you don't need to tell an engineer what to do. They're very good at problem solving. They know how to break things up. They know how to learn the tools to solve the problem. What they need is a very clear sort of scope of what the problem is and how to optimize the right solution for that, right? And so having people that understand that is quite key. As we grew at N26, we introduced a tool called the target operating model, which was talking about at certain sizes, you want to have a good idea of clarity as to making sure that people have a good purpose or a focus. Early stage, as Mashallah was saying, when you have 20 people, everyone's kind of doing everything. But as you get to say 50, not everyone has enough time to get enough context on every topic, right? So you have to start to specialize. And this is where you start to have maybe teams focus on certain product areas. And we went through 2 or 3 evolutions of our target operating model for the different size and scale. As an example, when we opened up Barcelona, which was a second product hub, we wanted it to be independent as much as possible, so they didn't have to keep like having distributed meetings like we do in these interesting times, and they could be sort of focused. And we transitioned a whole product area over there so that whole office could really focus on working autonomously as much as possible, and only have to interact with other teams when they had dependencies that needed changing or enhancing as such. So really focusing on sort of autonomy, mastery, purpose, and then also thinking about those elements. Engineers will tell you what they need, and often people aren't listening to what it is, right? So it might be about, oh, our build systems are slow, so you might need to invest in like carving out a platform team to actually help them with their tooling. And this is where a lot of the developer tooling sort of teams come from, because product teams don't have enough time to focus on those topics themselves. They also don't need to be told, here, use these tools. They need help actually focusing on implementing these things that they already want to use, and that will help unleash productivity. And so, I think really, going to PG's point about like building that feedback culture of like listening again to those common themes that touch upon lots of teams, but really acting upon it really rapidly, but keeping in mind the sort of autonomy, mastery, purpose, to help engineers feel like they're growing, to help make sure that they're attached to customers or to whatever their team goal is, and make sure that feedback is there versus like being proxied through too many people. And people will, have a great engineering culture as a result.
I think that's really great. Thank you. To add to that, I think it's the bigger the organization, the more intentional and explicit you have to be about the values. And that's when you're kind of working in a small team, you can set the culture that you want to see. But the bigger the team and people start working for that team, or teams expand, you need to be really explicit about things like, say, giving feedback positively, etc. And part of that might even be calling out your team values. But also you have to be aware that the more senior you get, the more people see you acting. So you need to live the values. You have to set a good example as a leader. So, I mean, one example, that a simple example is if you expect people not to work out of hours, then you shouldn't be sending emails out of hours, because even if you say it's fine, you don't have to reply, your actions will sort of set a different example. And I think a lot of that as well is about being able to be vulnerable as a leader and admitting where you don't know things. That's incredibly hard because you do want to be seen as somebody who is an expert, but sometimes you don't know things. When you admit you don't know things, it gives your team permission to be more open and vulnerable, which builds a better environment. And the other thing is something that took me a while to learn is you need to repeat yourself over and over again. If there's something that's important, you just need to keep saying it until you are so sick of the sound of your own voice saying it, but you still need to say it, because it's really important that you keep delivering the message. People won't have heard it before, or they will have forgotten, or they won't necessarily, remember. So I think you have to be more intentional and very repetitive.
Yeah, I mean, I just agree to everything that Anna just said right now. It was great.
Awesome. I agree with everything you said on here. I would just add one more thing. I did a talk on different numbers last year at Codemotion Berlin about tripling the size of my team at SuperAwesome. We scaled from roughly 12 to roughly 50 people. So yes, in short time. So we're talking about roughly 2 years. So one of the things that was key to scale at that pace was be adaptable. So culture will change. So whatever culture you have at 50 people, that will change. At 100, that will change. At 200, at 300, it's a different company. It's a totally different company. One of the things that Anna said that 500% second is crystallize the culture into values, because the values are the things that enable you to set the example and to scale the organization accordingly. So you can literally live the values and hire people who buy into those values. so that you get on board people that are already ready for your organization. And
I'd maybe add on to the values thing as well, because normally companies have their company values and then you have your engineering values. But one other trend that I'm seeing quite a lot is also engineering principles. Birgitte Bockler has this amazing talk about cultivating architecture, because I think one element of a great engineering culture is it's sort of clear about what a good decision looks like. And a lot of organizations don't really talk enough about what a good decision looks like for the organization. Right. So in an early stage startup, a good decision is you've produced something quickly, probably. Right. So it's not really needing to optimize for many different constraints. But then as an organization grows in its product, or as it scales up for its particular size, it's useful to be clear about what principles lead to a good decision. And the cultivating architecture talk is a really great one that explains it in a lot of detail.
Yep. Yeah. I agree with that as well. I cannot find anything I disagree with you on. Let's move to the next question. Oh, well, we are in COVID times, a COVID question. Due to COVID, we are in a crazy time. Do you have any advice to manage the tech teams and requests from the board and investors? Who wants to take this?
It's a good question. So I'll start. I don't think I have an answer, but I can say some things. I mean, it's been really difficult, and especially the longer it goes on, I can see people are getting very weary. So something we're doing now in terms of managing the tech teams is really being explicit about that we want to help people's well-being. So we have OKRs at the Financial Times, and this quarter we have a couple of explicit key results around knowing what the biggest problem is from a well-being perspective, and also addressing what we currently know. So one thing we found is there's a lot more meetings. You can't just drop by someone's desk and have a 2-minute conversation. So suddenly your calendar is quite packed with meetings, and that's very tiring. And so we've explicitly made a key result around making sure that everyone has enough time to focus on productive work throughout the day, because that will help energize people. So that's around managing the tech teams. Requests from the board and investors is a big one, and I think that speaks to your point, PJ, about being adaptable, because things, for many businesses, things have changed. Things that were making money are no longer making money, and there are other avenues to pursue. And so I think it's about when, like, we've had some sort of changing priorities, and what I've tried to do is explain as much context as I can to people, so that people understand, if you suddenly this project you've been working on is actually not as important as this other thing, why is that? I think if you know that this area of the business just isn't making any money and we need to do something to save it, that makes more sense than if you just hear it as a kind of request from the board, they've just changed their mind.
Good points. Good points.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add to that, and I'm, I guess, lucky enough to not have to deal so much with this at the moment. So that's why I don't have a great answer for it. But I agree with a lot of the things Anna said. And I feel like I probably would need to have more context around what kinds of requests are coming in from the board or investors to really give kind of a good answer for this. So that is to say, I don't have a great answer for it right now, but to give explanation as to why that's the case.
Yeah.
I'm going to maybe talk about the managing the tech team thing. I think one thing I've heard through a lot of the CTOs and VP engineering I'm working with is during the early part of COVID, everyone's saying, oh, our teams are much more productive, right? Now there's a lot of teams that are showing kind of what Anna was talking about is maybe signs of burnout. And this is one of the things where people don't know how to turn their sort of work life off, since it's all merged in with their home place. And so I think being conscious of And this is a good leadership thing anyway, of not just short-term reactions, but also seeing trends and patterns and sort of hypotheses about what leads to that. Mean that you have to sort of be watching out for, I guess, your health and maybe how other organizations and teams are sort of dealing with it. For teams that have been remote for a long time, they're still working okay, but they're also, it's very different times. So they're all feeling quite stressed out, even when teams have been very, very used to working remotely from that particular side. So I think, leading with empathy, trying to understand, the trends of what are happening in your team, and also trying to support them in the right sort of ways. As Anna said, I think the context makes a lot of sense. Every company is affected by COVID in some sort of way, and particularly if the business is commercially affected, helping people understand the sort of mechanics of how that trickles into the engineering or tech team gives a lot of context. Because I think one big worry that a lot of people have is, is my job at risk? And some companies will definitely be a lot more affected because of the nature of the business rather than the nature of the tech team. Right? So travel, retail, in-person retail, movies, there's a lot of things where those events are not so easy. The requests on the board thing, I think that's a different type of question, because I think it really depends on, I guess, how they're reacting. But I think the senior leadership of companies, I think they have a responsibility to understand how their market is affected by something like COVID, and to think about what makes sense. Does it make sense to pivot or to actually stop a whole part of your product investment, right? That's kind of a very different question. It has implications in your organization, in your staffing, but you also have a sort of fiscal and management responsibility to the board and investors to think strategically, not just about your tech side, but really thinking about the commercial and product side as well of the business. And so this is a good chance to sort of practice commercial thinking, to think about, actually, how does your business make money? What if you were a business investor and not a tech person, where would you make decisions differently? And that will help you make and navigate this in these times. And the only other final thing that I would say here is this is a good chance to also practice written communication. So I think a lot of people are defaulting to having meetings virtually, but actually scaling or writing things down scales a lot better. And you'll also hopefully improve your writing skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have something I want to add there, based off of what both of you said, which is, I think one thing that makes it particularly difficult is that it has hit a lot of companies financially, a lot of tech companies financially, and it has really put them in a fight or flight mode to try and figure out how they can survive. So there's understandably more pressure that puts on all of the employees that are working there to try and get them out of this. But at the same time, these are not the standard conditions of work for these employees. So you have this battle between the fact that you want to get your employees to give you more work, basically to help you through these times, but at the same time, that's unreasonable, honestly, for the employees, because they also are going through mentally a very strenuous and draining time, if nothing else changed. Many people have their children at home and having to take care of the children while they're working, having a partner at home, also having to balance that, having health concerns. There's so many things going on so that people cannot work in the same capacity that they could before COVID. And there's also the expectation, or the need, I should say, that these people are able to produce more. So I think there's a lot of, I don't have a solution for that. I wish I did. I would tell everybody. But I do think that's something that makes it particularly challenging and really important, that people are understanding that when, this is a general thing, when people show up to the office, they're showing up as human people with lives that exist out of the work context. And of course, people try and stay as professional as possible as they can be, but at the same time, everybody has things going on in their life. And I think as a good manager, you have to be aware and empathetic of that to a degree, at least, to understand that there are things happening in people's lives that will affect their ability to produce the kind of work that you want them to. And something that you can do is help support them through that. Even if all you really care about is the final product that they're producing, helping and supporting them through that will produce a better product for you. But also many people care about the people underneath it too, which I think you should. But if you just focus on the work and the quality that you're doing, it is beneficial to you to actually support your employees, to make sure they don't burn out, to make sure that they're mentally balanced during all of this, to make sure that they have the kind of support they need for like childcare assistance, whatever the case is. If you have any additional budget, which many people don't, but if you have any budget to help support them to have a better working space or environment, or I don't know, whatever you can do to make their situation better to be able to produce more work. But I do think one thing at least that should happen is that there should definitely be an acknowledgement from senior management that this is happening. And while you need to produce more work, you recognize that people are under particularly stressful and trying times. Because what I've heard from a couple organizations that I have friends working for is that the companies are like, okay, well, everybody's at home now, so we should be able to get more work. And we have all of these things we need to get done, without acknowledging what everybody's going through. And that takes away a lot of employee loyalty, takes a lot of employee excitement to work for this organization. And also, again, doesn't acknowledge the fact that people bring their whole selves to the jobs when they come in. So anything you can do, even if not financially, to help emotionally support, or at least acknowledge and validate the incredibly difficult times that many people are going through.
Yeah, and honestly, to add to this, to the board and investors, I would tell them that the number one asset that any company has is their people. Therefore, yes, I agree with all you said. So focus on well-being, focus on setting the example, and enable them to have a meeting with, their 3 years old daughter on their lap. It happened to me. I mean, why it shouldn't happen to one of my my engineers? I mean, it's yeah, I agree with everything you said. I'm keeping an eye on the timer, so, and on the clock. So we have time for one more question. Drum roll, because I'm going to click this button and see what's next. What are your thoughts on remote or distributed teams? Will it be the future? We have to prepare for a total remote scenario. So, well, this can be like another hour of discussion. Let's try to keep it short. Who wants to start?
Okay, well, I'll add just some quick thoughts, I guess, to this. This was already a discussion that was happening strongly before COVID happened at all and forced many companies to move into this model. So it's already something that people had been discussing for a while, completely remote teams. So it was already on the trajectory without anything else happening. So I definitely think that it will continue to be a priority for a lot of organizations. Do I think it will be total remote? Personally, I don't believe so, because I think that many people will see what they're losing through this process. Luckily for many tech companies, we were able to adapt quite quickly because of the nature of our work into fully remote situations, much better than many other organizations, which I think we should all be very grateful for. So we were able to move it into fully remote teams, and for the most part, everybody is still able to be productive and still ship features and still have meetings and teams and all hands and all of these things. But I think what it has shown a lot of people is the human aspect and what comes from that and the lack of that. And also how difficult it is to replicate the same kind of environment through purely virtual means. So I do think a lot of organizations will probably return after this back into at least having some kind of workplace setting. But I do know some, like Shopify, I know went fully, stated that they will go fully remote, which was not the original way that they were working before. So yeah, I don't think it's something that's going to be adopted by all organizations, despite the fact that many were able to transition to this quite quickly. What I think could be very cool to come out of it is for many organizations that were holding on to kind of an older, more traditional, always in the office stance. I think more of them will recognize that it's possible to give this flexibility as a benefit to their employees. So employees who have more like different things coming up in their life or traveling requirements or whatever comes up, they'll realize that they're still able to produce good quality work without having to necessarily be in the office. So they'll probably be more open to remote employees, even the organizations that decide that they'll still stay focused on one or multiple core locations. So I think that's one thing for me that's quite interesting to see how they'll be able to more easily incorporate people who are remote workers, because many organizations struggle with that in the past.
So my answer would be I hope not, because I don't really like working from home. I miss cycling to the office. I miss that kind of separation of work and home. And the other thing that I've observed is it's fine. I mean, it's fine for me. As you can see, I have a study, but a lot of my team don't have that. So I have a lot of people in my team who are working on their bed in a shared flat. They don't even have a desk. They don't have a room to go to. And, you know, there are kind of co-working places that don't mean you have to go back to the office, but that's still kind of, that's something that I hope that we will be able to go back to in future. And I think also, I agree with what you said, Amashala. I think it would be great if organizations could allow people to work from home more flexibly, and it's definitely addressed that kind of that presenteeism that some organizations have. We can see now that people can work effectively. I think the big challenge is going to be when it's possible to go back to offices, and some people want to work from home and some people like me want to go into the office. That kind of hybrid working is much harder than this situation where everyone is remote. And some of the problems we'll have to address are kind of systemic problems, like they've done some research that organizations that have remote workers, the remote workers are promoted at a slower rate than workers in the office, even when they're as productive. And so that's something that organizations are going to have to really explicitly address if we do move towards a more hybrid approach.
I think remote is inevitable. I don't think it's going to be total remote. You know, I think there's an interesting thing that I've observed anecdotally is that maybe like Anna knows some people that are like, I'm more productive when I'm in the office and I have the separation. And in fact, in Berlin, I know some people who, even though the offices are open, some people actually are going in just to have quiet time away from personal life and be able to do that. I think the other side is that, you know, we're humans and we kind of need some level of social contact. So even fully remote teams or fully distributed teams, you know, they still try to meet once a year personally because that human contact is still so essential. We all know this, having done VC type stuff, the connections that you make are okay with people that you probably know already, but it's a lot harder when you meet new people to really develop a new bond. And I think that makes it really hard for building new teams. It's one of the things that, interestingly, Slack, even though they announced that they were now going to go more remote, ironically, they've never been a remote-friendly company for a very long time, despite being a tool used by all sort of distributed remote teams. And part of that, I think, is probably due to the very rapid growth of how Slack has really had to grow a lot of people internally, and that's just going to be very difficult to do. But I think the interesting question is less about, you know, will it be remote or not? It's more about like, how do you make it work effectively? Right? And I think that's the interesting thing in your organizations. Does it mean that you have part-time where some people come in or the whole team comes in on certain days, or, you know, are you sort of remote but in the same time zone, right? That's something that a lot of companies try to do, is that you have a team in the same time zone, so you less have people sort of moving around or waking up at weird hours. And so I think that's a bit more of the interesting question, which is really how to make it maybe more flexible, more working. I don't think it's going to be completely, totally remote, but I also think it is accelerated a lot of companies' resistance to no remote whatsoever. And, you know, we had this for other types of reasons at N26, but, you know, I was always realistic is that people will have doctor's appointments and have to pick up parcels and they have chores. And of course, people are going to do some days or afternoons at home, right? So it's naturally remote. And we're lucky that we can work in an industry where we can do a lot more of this remotely than other types of industries. So.
I can't buy agree with all of you again. Again, I'm keeping an eye on the clock, so I need to change slide. I'm sorry for the other questions, but yeah, we don't have time anymore. So we are almost ready for the networking part. So keep an eye on that link, copy it. Don't click enter yet on that on the link. We are going to move to the networking session after this slide, which is actually more interesting because I want to squeeze every drop of insight from you folks. So before we move on, I would like to get some advice. So if there was one book or one resource, one blog, one, you name it, that helped you and it's helping you forming your ideas and on this topic, on leadership and technology mostly, that you would recommend to me or to the audience, what would that be?
Here's one I prepared earlier. I mean, so this book, High Output Management, is just so good. This really has sort of shaped the way I think about leadership. And it's not about technical leadership, but it covers a lot of the things we've talked about working out the highest leverage activity, where you can have the most impact, what developing people and how to develop people, how to produce, how to create high performing teams. So I definitely recommend this book extremely highly.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to cheat and I'm going to talk about two because I have to do a little bit of self-promotion.
All right.
So this one here is one of the books that I wrote called Talking with Tech Leads. And the point of it is a lot of people that move from being an engineer into a first-time technical leadership role, they really struggle, right? They don't really know what that looks like. It's very different. And it's a collection of stories that helped me understand the varieties and the flavors of how people approach this. And interestingly, I sort of talked to those first-timers and then also talked to people who've been doing it for a while to understand how people approach it differently. But for a non-Pacqua book, then I would recommend this one here by Jerry Weinberg. It's Becoming a Technical Leader. It's a little bit harder to get a hold of today, but I believe that it's on LeanPub. Unfortunately, Jerry has passed away, but he's got a huge collection of many, many different books. And this one's a really nice one, focused on particularly technical leadership.
Thank you.
And for me, I always find this question a bit funny because I don't tend to have books that I read about leadership. A lot of my experience and my background and the way that I practice leadership and management for myself comes from examples that I've seen throughout the course of my life. A lot of transferable skills, even for leaders that are outside of the engineering community, and then seeing engineering leaders that I've worked with and what I thought worked well and what didn't, and hearing a lot of feedback from people who worked with them before. So a lot of that gets distilled into my own personal practices, and I tend not to really have that come from books very often. But there is at least one blog that I can share. Should I screen share this or do you care? Okay, I'll screen share it. Oh wait, I can't. Okay, well anyways, it's from a woman named Lara Hogan, who has been the VP of engineering at many organizations, including Kickstarter. And I actually know somebody who worked with her at Kickstarter and had raving things, very positive to say about her. But that was resource, her blog was a resource that was also quite helpful for me when moving into some of my managerial positions. So that's something that I recommend, and I like her readings or her writing style as well. Yeah, so that will be my recommendation.
Fantastic. I have one to share as well. It's called The Art of Scalability from Marty Abbott. And this is mostly not about leadership, but about what good looks like. So what are good processes? What are good team structures and so on and so forth. And yeah, it helped me a lot. Now let's move to thanking you. Thanks to you, Anna, you, Patrick, you, Moshola. You've been fantastic today. Thanks to everybody who has been with us for over an hour now. And I really hope to see you in the upcoming appointments. The next one is in 2 weeks' time, with Frank, Renan, and Chris about talking about the secret sauce for delivering value. And next up is the link that you should click. That is the icebreaker session where we can know each other better. So thank you a lot again, and see you in the other room. Bye, folks.
Thanks, Codemotion, for organizing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.